Okay, so the program I'm going to talk about today is called The Bushwhacker. And if I didn't say so, my name is Tim Smith with the Adams County Historical Society. And I was looking at my notes here, and I first talked about this to the Adams County Historical Society as an evening lecture in Schmucker Hall in 2002. So I have my notes from 2002. So I've been talking about this subject for over 20 years. And I've written a little bit about it, but I don't know if there's a place where you can go and, and read what I've written about it, mostly just my lectures. But I wrote this in 2022, and I thought I'd just read this passage that I wrote. The small group of gray-clad soldiers galloped eastward over the Chambersburg Pike and through the Cashtown Pass. For the past 2 miles, they had been in pursuit of some local militiamen who were scouting the mountain passes of western Adams County. Occasional shots were exchanged at long range as the two parties spurred their horses onward through the defile. As the Confederate horsemen reached the base of a projection known locally as Gallagher's Knob, a shot rang out from the bushes and echoed through the narrow valley. Near the front of the column, a rebel soldier slumped in his saddle. Shocked and dismayed, his comrades hastened to his side to discover that the wound was of very serious nature. It was 3 o'clock on the afternoon of Tuesday, June 23rd, 1863. The mortally wounded soldier was to be the first Confederate killed in Adams County during the Gettysburg Campaign. His assassin, an Adams County citizen, was forever to be known as the Bushwhacker. Yeah, I don't know why I was trying to be dramatic there. Confirming that a bushwhacking did occur on that day can be found in our contemporary newspapers. So here's the Gettysburg Compiler of June 29th, 1865. On Tuesday, a body of rebel cavalry, variously estimated at from 20 to 80, came down the turnpike to Munshower's Tavern, 9 miles from this place, and then went back again. One of their number was shot from the bushes above Coon's sawmill and badly, perhaps mortally wounded, the party taking him off with them. And that tells us right in our newspaper, less than a week later, that this thing happened near Coon's sawmill and near the Munshower Tavern, and it happened on June 23rd. According to the Star and Banner, they wanted to provide a very romantic account of what happened. Our skirmishers and bushwhackers get themselves into close quarters with the enemy by their daring adventures amongst the mountains. They have been at work felling trees and barricading the passes, and as frequently fired upon by the enemy. And then, of course, we have this, which was a different article in the same paper. We are able to record the gratifying fact that at least one rebel has been shot since their appearance in Adams County. A squad of them, while passing a barn a few miles from Cashtown, was fired upon by one of our men. One rebel was seen to drop dead from his saddle. He was carried off by his comrades with the threat that buildings and everything else would be burned unless the man who shot him was delivered up. And again, part of my contribution to this story is researching the local newspapers and adding things to the story that people had been told over the years about this. And we have some remarkable evidence from right after the event that this is not a story, that this actually did happen. Here's from the Baltimore Sun. And I'm sure no one else thought to look in the Baltimore Sun for this stuff. But David Wills is sending telegraphs about the situation in Gettysburg prior to the battle to Governor Curtin, and also apparently to Baltimore. So this is sent the next morning from Gettysburg. Now we have a telegraph in Gettysburg on Chambersburg Street. I'm kind of convinced that there's another telegraph office associated with the railroad station, because David McConaughey is telegraphing Governor Curtin from one, and I think David Wills is telegraphing from another place. But if you didn't know that, we have some great stuff in some of the newspapers that's sent by telegraph. A small force of the enemy's mounted infantry came across the mountains yesterday afternoon along the Chambersburg Pike to within 2 miles of Cashtown. They were met by our bushwhackers. And you probably realize by now that I'm not just making up this term to describe this person. He has been described as the bushwhacker ever since the event. This is the next day. Who fired upon them, mortally wounding one of the enemy. The residue then retired. No sign of them has been apparent since. There has not at any time been any Confederate force nearer our town than 8 miles. Okay. And then another thing in the Baltimore Sun, a rebel party of 6 or 7 were fired on in the mountains yesterday morning by a bushwhacker planted in a thicket about 2 miles above Cashtown, wounding one who was carried off by his companions. And again, here is June 24th. This is in the Lancaster Daily Evening Express. And it gives a little more detail. But in this one, in the middle there, a body of 84 rebel cavalry. Wow. They were pretty good in counting. 84. Advanced to a point where our infantry forces were engaged in erecting barricades at a place called Summit near Newman's. Wow, that's pretty specific. And we know where Ephraim Newman lived. And that's at the very summit of the hill. And some of you might know that place known as TikTok. But that's where Newman's is. A portion of the forces were withdrawn, but have taken up another position. About a dozen rebels, cavalry remained at Newman's, and 30 advanced to Munshowers, 10 miles from Gettysburg. And we're going to talk about where Munshowers is. A skirmish took place when one rebel was mortally wounded and the enemy fled to the mountains. That's just fascinating. And this is being sent from Harrisburg, or it's a dispatch that's been produced in Harrisburg on June 23rd. Very accurate stuff. So, even though we have all this information about the bushwhacking, and as early as 1880, the bushwhacker was publicly identified in our local newspaper as Henry Hahn, who was a resident of Franklin Township. But even though over the years the details of the story have been muddled, and people have written about it and added to the subject and kind of changed some of the details. And, part of this was an inclination to make this into a human interest story, as if it was not part of the military activities that occurred in this area on that day or during that week. And we see this with the civilian accounts here in the Battle of Gettysburg, that we have the battle, and then we have these cute little civilian accounts that have nothing to do with the battle. And of course, here at the Adams County Historical Society, our mission is to interweave the civilian accounts back into the story of the battle. And there's definitely been, a tendency to divide the two into separate stories. and then the whole the whole thing just kind of becomes muddled. But let me talk about a couple major sources that people have read about the human interest story of the Bushwhacker and what we know about those sources. Of course, the first is Aaron Sheely. So you can see on March 13th, 1900, Aaron Sheely wrote an account, the first rifle shot in the Gettysburg Campaign. I see I made a mistake here when I was typing. He's born in 1836, not 1846. How can I make that mistake? I just typed that last night too. So Aaron Sheely, at the time of its publication, he was a regular contributor to the Gettysburg Compiler, having a few years earlier contributed a series of articles concerning the natural history of South Mountain. At the time of the Bushwhacker article, he was in the midst of a series concerning history of Adams County. He wrote a series of articles called Pioneer Life in Adams County. And you can tell they're his articles because his pen name is Ash, Aaron Sheely. I think that's creative, don't you? Ash. And he wrote a series of articles about local Native Americans called the Aborigines of Adams County. He wrote an article called Some Account of the Manners and Customs of the Early German Settlers of Adams County. He wrote a series of articles, Some Account of the Scotch-Irish Settlement in Adams County. He also wrote, in 1903, a series of articles about the Battle of Gettysburg. I should tell you that his stuff on the Battle of Gettysburg is not generally that accurate. I use his stuff for two reasons. Usually I use his stuff because he gives the names of the places in and around the battle from a local perspective. So he has terminology of the names of the ridges and the streams and the hills that soldiers aren't going to have when they write about it. And then, of course, secondly, he tells stories. So it's a good way to include some stories. Usually I don't have another source when I use one of his stories, but they're really interesting. So Sheely grew up, he actually was born in Mount Joy Township, and his parents must have moved to Adams County after moved to Cashtown area after the 1850 census. And his father bought a farm. His father died, I think, in 1856, something around there. I didn't write that down. And his brother took over his father's property near Cashtown, and it's the area of the Round Barn. Noah Sheely, Aaron's brother, his sons would build the Round Barn. And Noah Sheely is the one who planted the orchard up there that really, in the 1870s and 80s, started the apple industry in that area. So he lived at one time less than a mile from the Bushwhacker. He would have known him. There's no doubt about that. But it's interesting to note, and they're basically the same age. I think they're like 6 years apart. No doubt that they hung out together. It's interesting to note in Sheely's article, I didn't talk about that yet, that he gives the name of the Bushwhacker as John Smith. This has messed with people over the years. It's an obvious attempt to hide the identity of the Bushwhacker. I'm pretty sure Aaron Sheely's wife was related to some of the Bushwhacker's cousins. Maybe she was a cousin herself. That gets kind of complicated when we talk about his genealogy. But he's hiding that. Now, I wanted to mention that Aaron Sheely, one of my favorite things he wrote about was a series of articles called South Mountain Rambles. And I didn't put the date in, but I think it says 1879. And if you read part of the article, this is about Rock Top. That's this hill above the Cashtown Inn. And you can see, he says, in 1879, during the Battle of Gettysburg, Rock Top was used by the rebel army as a signal station. A tall pine tree growing in front of the crag on which we stand, he's standing up there, was utilized for signaling. And he also says that a Southern soldier is buried up there. I don't know why they would take a dead Southern soldier all the way to the top of the hill to bury him. You know, doesn't make any sense. But, you know, I have this drawing from Charles Reed from the 1880s of the Cashtown Inn. You might have seen this. The Cashtown Inn put it up on their website just recently. But if you look to the right of the Cashtown Inn, on top of the hill, they show the signal station on Rock Top, which I find very interesting. So we're pretty sure it's true. The Confederate Army had a signal station there. So, you know, some of this Aaron Shilley stuff is based on his local knowledge and speaking to local people about the events. So I don't think that he thought the guy's name was John Smith. I think he knew the guy's name was not John Smith. There is an issue, though. The major problem with Shilley's article, which a lot of people have read and have reread, is that he thinks the incident occurred on June 26th. On June 26th, Jubal Early's division destroyed Caledonia Furnace and then marched across Adams County. There were skirmishes at Marsh Creek and Bailey's Hill. And for those of you who went on the bus tour with us last week, we talked about that fighting on June 26th. And they faced off against the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment. And because he thought that the incident occurred on June 26th, and I have no idea why he thought that, instead of June 23rd, the Confederate soldiers that the Bushwhacker is firing at and the one he kills is part of Elijah White's 35th Virginia Battalion of Cavalry, leading the head of Jubal Early's division towards Cashtown. And then in the article, most of Shilley's article is about how Jubal Early is really angry that they killed one of his men, and then how he threatens to burn Cashtown to the ground because of the incident. Of course, Jubal Early never rode to Cashtown. You know, he left the Hilltown Road and rode over to Mummersburg and then came into Gettysburg that evening. So the most of the article is just a story that is fictional. And I don't know what his purpose was in writing this story. Sometimes it's hard for us to grasp, but sometimes at that era, people would write articles about the battle, but they would be a little more like fictional articles, but they wouldn't tell you they were fictional articles. J. Howard Wirt wrote a lot of stuff that people think is history and it's just fiction. So I don't know how to explain that better, but Shilley's article talks about the bushwhacking incident, but has the wrong name of the person, has the wrong date, and all the details are fiction. So, but people have read that and used that over the years, and that's part of our problem. Now we come to my hero of the story, William Storrick. William Storrick was born just after the battle, or actually, no, I'm sorry, just before the battle. He's a little kid, and he's here at Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and he has as a little kid, his father takes him to meet Lincoln, and he gets to see Lincoln the night before, or the morning of the address, I believe it is. Also, he grew up on East Cavalry Field, and he worked for the War Department. He became the superintendent of licensed battlefield guides. And after he retired, he wrote a series of articles in the Gettysburg newspaper based on his research. And because the wording of several sentences in his article is almost identical, we know that he read Shealy's article and had access to Shealy's article. So this is 37 years later when he wrote about the event. I wanted to mention that Storrick started in 1931, published one of my favorite books on the battle. And this thing was reprinted and reprinted and reprinted like 30 times. And if you know, I have a box where I'm trying to collect every year it was reprinted with the reprint date on it. So if you have a Storrick book you want to donate to my collection, I'm more than happy to take it. But him and I share another thing. We hate the horse's hooves story. He wrote a whole thing in the newspaper about how the horse's hooves do not tell you if the rider was killed. He was really angry about that, which I tend to be too. But here's the really cool thing. Not only did he use Shealy's writings, but he interviewed people in Cashtown that were still alive, that had connection to Henry Hahn or the story. And he added a whole bunch of details. And when, I forget exactly how it happened, when we moved the Adams County Historical Society from the old dorm of the Lutheran Seminary in 2011, and then moved to the Wolf House and put a whole bunch of stuff in storage. One day, one of the volunteers came up to me and said, "What do I do with this box?" And it was a box, and it said Storrick on it. And I opened it up, probably the first time anybody had opened up the box since the 1940s. And in it was his research notes for each of the stories he read wrote in the Gettysburg newspaper from the 1930s. And they were given to us by his wife, Nina Storrick, who lived on East Broadway, I think it was, or maybe it's West Broadway over here. And I was stunned. And of course, the first thing I did was look for the article about the Bushwhacker, found it in there, and he had his interviews with the people in Cashtown were in the folder. So all of a sudden, I have more information that he didn't put in his article. And here is an interview. You can see at the top, he interviewed Daniel Kuhn, who was the son of the Kuhn sawmill guy. And he interviewed Jacob Shara. And Jacob Shara is the son of John Shara, who lived right near the scene. And he was married to Elizabeth Ann Schultz, who was the daughter of Henry Schultz. And as we find out, Henry Schultz is one of the Bushwhacker buddies. Henry Hahn was not alone when he was responsible for this. But this is great stuff. And so, and also if you know me, my fiance, Libby Schultz, that's her great-great-great-great-grandfather. Great-great-great-great-great, maybe. But Henry Hahn, Uriah with a U, Uriah Powell, David Powell, and Henry Schultz were at the old Willow Hotel. There's a mistake. Now the Cashtown Inn. See, again, some mistakes creep in because we know the Willow Hotel is Munshauer's. It's a totally different place than the Cashtown Inn. And on June 23rd, look, he gave him the right date. So this is the grandson of one of the Bushwhackers. These men became liquored up or drunk, and upon discussion, the outstanding topic at the time, namely the threatening invasion, Hahn swore to shoot the first rebel that he saw. And he gives details, I'll talk about this in a little while, about the bushwhacking. So what's really interesting about this is when Storrick published his article, he couldn't bring himself to move the story away from June 26th. And in his article, The bushwhacking takes place on June 26, and still it's one of Elijah White's men that he's firing against. And then I wanted to mention that during the 1980s, a guy named George Scotch, I imagine that's how you pronounce his name, of Ohio, printed an article in Blue and Gray magazine declaring the event occurred on June 26 and told a little story about it. Did you know him? No? Okay, because he wrote about the Cashtown Inn. And then in 2001, one of our guides, Gary Cross, wrote an article about the invasion, and he places it on June 26. And all these people are putting in June 26 because someone before them did it, and they don't realize that it's June 23rd. And the reason this is important is because it's a totally different group of Confederates on June 23rd than it is on June 26th. And of course, what we're getting at is we're going to figure out the name of the guy who was killed because of this. And no one could do it before because of these mistakes. So we're very fortunate that here at the Adams County Historical Society, we have newspaper clipping books. And I was able to find this newspaper clipping years ago in the original clipping in our files. And there's an article written about the bushwhacking incident. And you can see, I couldn't find the original article for a while because it looks like July 29th, but it was January 29th, 1880. And in the article, they give the details of the bushwhacking, and they name the guy who killed the Confederate soldier as Henry Hahn. So in 1880, people were told the facts of the story. It's just that they kind of became muddled over the years. Oh, one thing I did want to mention is in William Storrick's article, he did change it back and say Henry Hahn was the bushwhacker. So he knew that from Shealy, that Shealy was covering up his name, but he didn't know the date. So now let's put in a little bit of context, because what I'm going to suggest is this is not a random act of violence by one guy, that he was incited to kill this Confederate soldier by the military authorities of Pennsylvania. And this was part of a larger military action than just this random guy shooting a random Southerner. In June of 1863, the Southern Army moved westward from Fredericksburg, Virginia, and marched through the Shenandoah Valley, across the Potomac River, and into Pennsylvania. The leading elements of Lee's army were Albert Jenkins' brigade of cavalry. And they actually captured Chambersburg on the evening of June 15th. Have you thought about that before? So June 15th, the Southern Army are in Chambersburg. It's not until June 30th the leading elements of the Northern Army reach Gettysburg. So for 2 weeks, the Southern Army is in Pennsylvania, marching back and forth across the state and wreaking havoc. On June 16th, Albert Jenkins' brigade sent a detachment to Scotland, and they tried to destroy the bridge over the Cumberland Valley Railroad Bridge. I think they do destroy it temporarily, that raid. And then they send men all the way out to Fayetteville, and they ride to Thaddeus Stevens Furnace on June 16th. When Governor Curtin realized that the Southern forces were hitting Pennsylvania, he sent out calls for local militiamen and to join companies and regiments for the emergency, to try to hold the Confederate invasion back. It's very complicated, but there's a long series of events that occur between the authorities in Harrisburg and the authorities in Washington, D.C. over the use of local men as militia here to hold back the invasion. And the federal government does not want Pennsylvania to raise local units because they're afraid people will join those units and not go into the regular army. And so they want all the men to join the army, not be in some kind of state militia units. And so Governor Curtin has trouble organizing troops to halt a Confederate invasion. Of course, the federal government assures Governor Curtin that the Southern Army will not invade Pennsylvania, but they do. And so on June 11th, during the time where they feared an invasion might occur, they formed the Department of the Susquehanna in Harrisburg. And Darius Couch, a former commander of the 2nd Army Corps of the Army of the Potomac at Chancellorsville, had resigned because he didn't like Hooker. And he came through Harrisburg and was given command of the Department of the Susquehanna. Shortly after the invasion, Major Granville O. Howler, a regular Army officer that had become sick and had resigned his commission with the Army of the Potomac, was living in Harrisburg recovering from his disability. And he rode to Harrisburg and he offered his services to Darius Couch. And Couch made him an aide-de-camp and sent him back into this area to gather intelligence. He ended up riding to Columbia, preparing the defenses at the Wrightsville-Columbia Bridge. He rode to York. He spoke with the mayor and the authorities in York to try to organize some kind of resistance should the Southerners come that way. He rode to Gettysburg. He arrived here on the evening of the 19th, June 19th. On June 20th, he called a meeting at the Adams County Courthouse. And on June 22nd, the Gettysburg Compiler, our local newspaper, we had 3 local newspapers at this time that were published weekly. There's an article that details the meeting of the court at the courthouse and what he's suggesting. And he would like that the people of Adams County, because of the threatening invasion, all able-bodied men between 18 and 60 to get together. And they're going to organize them into groups. And then each man is to provide himself immediately with a musket, a rifle, or a shotgun, and 40 rounds of ammunition. And then he's going to send them into the mountain range to build barricades, obstruct the roads, and skirmish with his advance. J. Howard Wirt, who I mentioned earlier, is at the meeting at the courthouse. And he says, looking at it calmly now after the lapse of years, Howler's proposition in his handbill and in the courthouse speech bordered very closely on bushwhacking and guerrilla warfare, which the people in the press of the North had always denounced unsparingly when practiced against them south of the Mason-Dixon line. Only in this case, it was our homes that were threatened. So he is organizing people to go out and hide in the woods and fire and shoot and kill Confederate soldiers. This doesn't seem like this can possibly apply to any rule of warfare. But he's doing it, he says, in an official capacity as the aide-de-camp of Darius Couch. And people, first of all, here's the plan. On June 15th, Albert Jenkins had captured Chambersburg. And for a few days, the Southern Army, although they did send scouts out and to Scotland and towards Shippensburg and out to Thaddeus Stevens Furnace towards Gettysburg and over the mountains into Fulton County, pretty much they were being contained. The authorities in Harrisburg sent militia from Harrisburg down the Cumberland Valley towards Shippensburg. and they wanted to bring in troops from the western side and barricade the Tuscarora summit and the gaps that went over the mountain, the North Mountain Range. At the same time, forces were being brought into Gettysburg and organized here, and we were going to organize forces and barricade the mountain gaps here west of Gettysburg in the South Mountain Range. So the plan is to contain the invasion. And the Pennsylvania authorities believed that they were successful, that this movement was working. The problem was that Albert Jenkins moved into the Cumberland Valley as an advanced force, and he was just waiting for Rhodes' division and then Ewell's corps to move up behind him. And really, the Confederate Army was just gaining strength in the area of Chambersburg. And on June 26th, they were ready to break out, and then they marched northward and they marched eastward, and they destroyed all the militia forces that even opposed them in their breakout. But the thing the Northern authorities don't get is that the Southerners are not trying to break containment from that valley during this period. So this is the mission of the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment, 700 men that were organized in Harrisburg. Company A being from Gettysburg, Company I being from Hanover and New Oxford. They were organized in Harrisburg, and they were being sent back to Gettysburg. And on June 26th, they were being sent out to the South Mountain Range as a force to block the roads over the mountain to keep the Southern Army at bay. But they never made it into position because, of course, there was the fighting on June 26th. So this is the plan. And so, some people involved in this plan, let me talk a little bit about them. We have Robert Bell's Adams County Cavalry. With the invasion, Robert Bell, he had an emergency cavalry unit in 1862 during the time of the Maryland invasion that was formed locally. They were just a militia unit. But on June 16th, he traveled to Harrisburg, and he told Governor Curtin he had a cavalry unit he was going to bring to Harrisburg and join for the emergency. Governor Curtin told Bell, just stay in Adams County, and I'll send a representative there. I need you there to scout the roads of the South Mountain Range. And so he stayed here, and on June 23rd, they were mustered into federal service by Howler himself on the morning of June 23rd, the same morning of the bushwhacking. There's about 40 men in this unit. Now, they don't have uniforms. This is a later photograph of him. These are just guys who were gathered together to have horses and guns. There was also David McConaughey, a local Gettysburg attorney who was a leader of local independent scouts, and they had already provided valuable information. On June 16th, he had some guys ride over the mountain range, and basically what they were doing is they were older men in the community, and they disguised themselves as older men. And then they rode into the Confederate lines of battle and counted battle flags and learned what units were there, and then rode back. And McConaughey was telegraphing this information to Governor Curtin in Harrisburg. And at Harrisburg, at the State Archives, we have all these telegraphs. I don't even know if anybody else has looked at them besides me, but they're really cool. It's just one of these nerdy things I've found. But in the Adams County Historical Society, in a collection that we got from the courthouse years ago, here's a list, and I don't think it's any coincidence. Look what date it is. June 20th, 1863. This is a list of men who were raised under the call of the governor on the 16th by Howler at the courthouse. And they're all, there's a couple more pages to this, but you can see that there are some of the older men from our town that are going to be serving in this secret force of independent scouts. Isn't that awesome? Do we have their names? And I pointed this out not a few weeks ago on one of my programs. Tilly Pierce's father is one of those guys. Yeah, James Pierce, right there. But you can see if you're familiar with some of the guys in our community, some of the names. Charles X. Martin is the Burgess of Gettysburg. Yeah, really interesting stuff. Also, there's another force of men, and this is the 1st Troop of Philadelphia City Cavalry. This is a group of very wealthy Philadelphia residents that in time of emergency don their really fancy uniforms, get their horses, and volunteer in the service in the Federal Army. The 1st City Troop of Philadelphia City Cavalry still exists, but now they have tanks. And they have a museum in Philadelphia. It's really interesting. And we have 2 diaries from this unit about the Gettysburg Campaign. So they're not mustered in the federal service. They're just assisting as volunteers. So they come to Harrisburg. When they get to Harrisburg, they won't be mustered in. And Curtin doesn't really know what to do with them. Their commander was a United States Congressman, Samuel Randall, that came up from Washington, D.C. and met him in Harrisburg. And they brought their horses by train to Philadelphia. And then, so Governor Curtin says, okay, ride to Gettysburg and see if you can help, Major Howler in gathering information. And these guys arrive in Gettysburg on June 20th. And so they come riding into the town. And, this idea of not allowing yourself to be mustered into federal service allowed you to just quit and leave whenever you want. But one of these guys was injured during the campaign and tried to collect a pension after the war. And the government's like, no, I'm sorry. You refuse to be mustered into federal service, so we're not giving you a pension. I thought that was really interesting. I think they're rich and they think like they might not need a pension anyway. So anyway, so they have about 40 guys. Again, we don't have an official list of them, just like we don't have an official list of Robert Bell's guys before they joined the regular army or the volunteer army. So let's say we have 80 guys, 2 cavalry units, and we also have the group of Gettysburg Scouts, and it seems like there's some local men involved also in this. So here's an article in our local newspaper about Howler and how he's in Gettysburg. I got this photograph from Carlisle, from the United States Army military history. Oh, no, they have it there. Wait a minute. Where did I get mine? I'm wrong. Oh, I got this photograph from a private album we have here in our collection that was owned by Robert Bell. So it has been 20 years, since I started talking about this, so I forget details. But here Howler is mentioned in our local newspaper. And you can see he's a Mexican war veteran. It's interesting that he received, a brevet commission to major, I think it was, in the regular army because of his services at the Battle of Monterey. And the first thing he's going to do is ride out to Monterey. I wonder if he stopped at the hotel and said, hey, your hotel is named after the battle in which, I was in. I think that's kind of cool. So he takes his ragtag force of all these cavalrymen and local citizens. In one account, John Burns is with them. And they go out to Fairfield Road all the way to Monterey Pass, and they try to put a barricade across the Monterey Pass. They do this because part of Jenkins' force was in Waynesboro, and it had been riding up the side of the mountain skirmishing with Union troops around Monterey. So they're building a barricade, and here come some Confederates up near the barricade, and there's an actual skirmish. No one is wounded at Monterey on June 21st. I mentioned last couple weeks ago when we took that field trip out to Monterey Pass that they have a wayside exhibit out there that talks about it, and they have the wrong date. Made me really angry. June 22nd, they say it occurred. It's clearly June 21st. And while they're building the barricade, another detachment of Jenkins Cavalry comes riding up over Cold Springs Road, over the mountain, down to Track Road, rides through the town of Fairfield, and then rides out Iron Springs Road and comes up behind them from the other direction. And there's another little firefight at the barricade. Bell's cavalry and the Philadelphia City Troop sit on a hill and watch them ride by. And Bell writes a letter to his wife about how close he got to the Southerners. They don't try to engage them. No one's killed on that day, but there is fighting in Western Adams County on June 21st over the idea of creating a barricade there. You know, there are other units that we know of that are formed during this period as, Howler is calling for, young boys and older men to come join the Army. There's a unit formed in Bendersville. And I don't know if you ever read about this, and I'm not even sure what day. It might be June 24th. While they're drilling with their rifles, one of the men accidentally shoots and kills another man in Bendersville. So there's a local, he's a blacksmith from New York State that was working in Bendersville that was accidentally killed in this drilling of this militia unit. Do you know firearms are dangerous if you're not, used to handling them? I think we have this perception that because people lived a long time ago, they knew how to fire a gun or were familiar with firearms. That is not the case. So anyway, Arntsville organizes a militia unit. And we are fortunate that Daniel Gitt, the man who wrote the article about the bushwhacking incident, wrote an article about the Arntsville militia and gives us their names. Look at that. Hiram Lady and Elias Spangler, both from downtown Arntsville, are the officers. Look, Jacob Comfort, a veteran of the War of 1812. Is anybody related to him back there? Or isn't that one of your relatives? Donna is related to him, I believe. So isn't that awesome that we have their names? So on June 23rd, the Arntsville militia are given orders by Howler. And this time, they're going to build a strong barricade across the Chambersburg Turnpike. Listen, no one is sneaking over the mountains to attack this area. They're going to come over on one of the roads. And there's only a few places where major roads cross over the mountain range. They tried to block one on June 21st. It didn't work out too well. On June 23rd, Howler is going to build a barricade across the Chambersburg Pike west of Cashtown. And he enlists the services of the Arntsville militia to build it. So according to Daniel Gitt, Colonel Howler ordered us to blockade the mountain pass on the Gettysburg and Chambersburg Turnpike. Our officers marched us to the place designated. We had 3 rounds of ammunition each to start with. We threw out our pickets and commenced operations. While there, a portion of Bell's cavalry passed us to reconnoiter towards Chambersburg. So he has the Arntsville militiamen come out, over the old Shippensburg Road, and they're going to build a barricade. And I tend to think that the site of the barricade, from reading the accounts, is where I don't know the name of it because they changed it a few times. Pine Haven Rest Home or something like that. How about this? I can't think of the name of it. There's an Italian restaurant there. Bella Italia? Paramount. That's right. Paramount is the name of the place, the retirement home. And then, is it Ciao Bello? What's the name of the restaurant? Okay. Well, if you go out to Chambersburg Pike on your way to Caledonia, on the right-hand side, there's a rest home, an old age home, and then on the left, there's an Italian restaurant. It's somewhere near there is where the barricade is. Meanwhile, Howler takes his men, and again, about 80 of them, out to meet the group from Gettysburg along the Cashtown Pike. And I have a note here. Do you suspect that these guys passed the tavern where the Bushwhacker and his buddies are drinking? Yes. So this connection is really never made in the Bushwhacker story, that there's all this stuff happening. And that these guys don't randomly ride out to kill Confederates. They're going out to maybe assist, maybe they're part of their own little Cashtown Bushwhacker group, like the Orangeville Bushwhackers. But these four men are there too. And I kind of want, one of my purposes is to try to get people to understand that they are part of this larger military action that's taking place. Now, unbeknownst to all these men is something else that was going on June 23rd. Captain Robert Mormon and a detachment of Company D, 14th Virginia Cavalry, probably two companies from that unit, but we know Company D's there, were in Chambersburg. And on June 23rd, they were sent out to Caledonia Furnace. They had visited the furnace on the 16th, and here they are going out again. While they're there on the 23rd, they steal like 7,000 pounds of bacon, and they take all the supplies from the supply house. But here they are at Caledonia. The ironworks is sort of, where the little blacksmith shop is? It's just across the road from Totem Pole Playhouse. And they're there, and all of a sudden, one of the Confederates looks over, and here comes some Union cavalrymen riding down the Chambersburg Pike, Robert Bell's men. And so, these guys take off in pursuit of them back towards the barricade. And it was probably about 2 o'clock in the afternoon when Bell's cavalry were sighted by Captain Mormon's detachment, or vice versa, at Caledonia Furnace. Upon seeing the rebels, the scouts turned and ran, and rode away. And according to one of the Southerners, 40 men started in pursuit of the Yankee Guard and the horses in the direction of Gettysburg. A few minutes later, Bell's men come back to the barricade, and the Orangeville militiamen are building this barricade with their rifles, or 3, shots each. And Bell's guys just come riding around and through and head towards Gettysburg and say, hey, the rebels are coming. So, according to Daniel Gitt, who's an eyewitness, we retreated into the thickets. Our captain, Elias Spangler, and Lieutenant Hiram Lady, ascertaining that the arms of some of the men that had been at work were left in the middle of the road, and they boldly stepped out into gun range of the rebels and gathered up the guns. The lieutenant said, Captain, we are in danger here. And they concluded that as discretion is the better part of valor, they would retire to where they would not be a conspicuous target for the rebels. So Hiram Mickley, or James Mickley, who was later with the 21st Pennsylvania Cavalry, he was with Captain Robert Bell, and he was actually captured at this fight. Now, they're not wearing uniforms. And so when they question him, he starts talking Pennsylvania Dutch. And they capture, I think, 7 men, Let's see. And among the captured guys was Jacob Comfort, the 70-year-old veteran of the War of 1812. Captured. And the Confederates asked him what they're doing out there, and they're like, I don't know. Somebody was building a barricade. We came out to look. We don't know. And they're not dressed as soldiers. So they're able to talk their way out of it, and they're let go. The Confederate soldiers bust down the barricade, and they ride towards Gettysburg, following the remnants of Bell's Adams County Cavalry. We're not sure where the Philadelphia City Troop is in all this. They claim to be involved. I suggest they're ahead of the Adams County Cavalry riding back to Gettysburg. So they're chasing. So I think it depends how you count, but it seems like 20 to 40 Confederate soldiers are chasing 40 to 80, local militiamen. How come they don't stop and turn around and fire back? You always wonder. It's not really their fault. Every single time during the Gettysburg Campaign that Confederate soldiers met Pennsylvania militiamen, they ran. And very quickly. Never once did the Pennsylvania militiamen put up a fight. And these are battle-hardened veterans of the Army of Northern Virginia. And the men they're facing have no military experience, per se. So anyway, we are fortunate that there's an account by a Confederate soldier of this whole action. And I'll probably butcher his name. His name is Lieutenant Herman Storrick. He's in Company D, 14th Virginia. And his account of this day is published in Southern Historical Society papers, and we have it in our library. He recalled that the pursuing Confederates traveled about 2 miles beyond Caledonia Iron Works when they discovered the road blockaded. So they throw the blockade down and they chase the men. Let's see. At a narrow road entering a wooded area near the base of a steep incline known as Gallagher's Knob, a shot rang out from the bushes. A rebel reeled in his saddle. His comrades hurried to his side, but it was soon discovered that the wound was mortal. Recognizing the dangers of further advance, the pursuit was broken off. According to Daniel Gitt, the rebels were exacerbated, supposing it was done by us. They told our captured pickets that if they knew that they belonged to those damned bushwhackers, they would hang them in less than 2 minutes. But our men told so plausible a story, disclaiming connection or knowledge of our company, that they were released. The rebels then fell back, taking the wounded man with them. The Confederates turned slowly and returned to Caledonia Iron Works, where they say they were fired upon again. Reflecting on the day's events, Lieutenant Storrick complained, "This section of Pennsylvania seems to be full of bushwhackers." Thanks to several clues provided by Lieutenant Storrick, one of our licensed battlefield guides, Jim Klaus, and I'm going to guess it was around 2001 he did this, went through the Confederate service records and figured out that the wounded soldier who died that day, mortally wounded, was Eli Amick of the 14th Virginia Cavalry. And much more recently, I was able to find a genealogy on the internet that included part of the Amick family. And in the genealogy, it mentions that John Amick's 6 sons served in the Confederate Army during the war. And one of them, Eli Amick, was a veteran of the Mexican War. And it says, in a cavalry charge at Gettysburg, Eli Amick was killed in action. We don't know what happened to his body. We don't know where he was buried. According to Daniel Gitt, the Confederates took the wounded soldiers to Greenwood, at the intersection of Route 30 and a Blackscap Road, where he died. In William Storrick's account, he says that he was told he was taken to the Kaufman Hotel, which is located on the Chambersburg Turnpike back at Greenwood. In 1900, Aaron Shirley wrote that he was taken back to Newman's, where he soon died. So one thing is clear, Eli Amick is the first Confederate soldier to be killed during the Gettysburg Campaign. So he doesn't have a burial site today. There's an Amick cemetery that I've looked at in, I think, today's West Virginia, and he's not there. So again, we have this article in the newspaper that describes the skirmish. And of course, it tells all these places. They remained at Newman's. Again, Newman's. A skirmish took place when one rebel was mortally wounded and the enemy fled to the mountains. And this article sort of makes it sound like the 1st City Troop of Philadelphia and Captain Bell's company were involved. But it was not them that killed the Confederate soldier or slowed down the advance. It was one guy from Adams County with his 3 buddies. So a little bit about the Henry Hahn. So his story really begins at the Willow Grove Hotel. It's on the 1858 wall map. It's shown as the Willow Springs Hotel. And it's right there. And on the 1872 atlas, it's shown as the Willow Grove Hotel. So that's how sometimes you get the Willow Springs Hotel, and sometimes you get the Willow Grove Hotel. On this map, which is, of course, Cashtown's there, so we're on the old Lincoln Highway, and we're west of Cashtown. We're near the intersection of the Hilltown Road and the Chambersburg Turnpike. And I think this right here is Bigham Road, if you've been there. Bigham Road. And I guess on this, don't have it on here, but another road that goes off is Spigot Valley Road, I think it's called, right there. So you get an idea of where we're talking about. Henry Hahn is shown on the 1858 wall map as living right there near this stream, which is a feeder of Marsh Creek. This is basically the site of his house is where the Cashtown Lions Park is located. So for homework, I want you to go out the new Route 30, past it's a flashing light, I think they're right at where the Cashtown Orangeville Road crosses at the bank, and go a little bit further up the hill, just past the fruit stand on the right. And there's a little road that says Cashtown Lions Park that goes off to the right, down near Marsh Creek, and you can get a feel for where the Bushwhacker lives. Some other things on this map, of course, in the article we talked about, the Powells are with them. I'm not sure when the Powells moved to this area, but they live somewhere in this area. And the Schultzes. And there's Henry Schultz. And so Henry Schultz and Uriah Powell and David Powell, which I believe live somewhere along here, they are Bushwhacker buddies, I like to call them. They're going to be with the Bushwhacker, but they don't have guns, apparently. Only the Bushwhacker has a weapon. And Erica, do you see that? What's the name? Federer? Right there. So they're living next to the Schultzes. So a lot of people, I know a lot of people that are related to these people. So a lot of them. And here's a close-up of the Willow Springs Hotel. According to William Storrick, who again is basing his stuff on that Shara account, there was much talk of the threatened invasion and what would happen to them personally and to their homes, as they had not forgotten Stuart and his raiders the year before. In October of 1862, Jeb Stuart came through the same area and stole the horses of all the local residents. And I know we have a claim from the Coon family. There's Daniel Coon. I think it says you see his house in Sawmill. Today, the road kind of goes around his house on that side. But Coon and his sawmill, he has a horse, and he has a claims file for the horse. Let's see. A few members of the hotel party indulged too freely in strong drink with the usual results. This, however, was the exception and not the rule. So, these guys don't always get really drunk at the tavern. I like how they put that in there. After a discussion of the impending danger, 4 members of the hotel group, Henry Hahn, David Powell, Uriah Powell, and Henry Schultz, decided to go out to Chambersburg Pike and watch for the approach of the rebel invaders. And again, in the story of the Bushwhacker as presented as a human interest story, these 4 guys just do this totally on their own, and they randomly go out and hide in the woods, and all of a sudden Confederates just suddenly appear. But I think that they were told. I do have one account from the Philadelphia City Troop that they mentioned stopping at a bar and drinking. So I think maybe the whole Philadelphia City Troop is back here at the bar also. They don't seem to be at the scene of the fight. And so these guys go out and hide in the woods. According to that one account I mentioned by Ashara, Hahn is heard to say he would shoot the first rebel that came along or die in the attempt. Here's the 1872 map of the same area showing the Coon House and the Willow Grove Hotel. Oh, should I mention that Henry Munschauer had a tavern license in Franklin Township from 1858 to 1864. And he obviously is a proprietor of that establishment. And so that's why it's called Munschauer's in some accounts. And it still stands. I've never been in it, but I met the people. Are they here that live there? No? They come here sometimes. They're very proud. They renovated the whole place. And so it still stands. And just on the other side of it, that's Bigham Road. So if you want to go out and see it, there's hardly anybody on that stretch of the road. You can just stop in the middle of the road. Nobody will care. And you can look and see the historic tavern we're talking about. It is just totally awesome that it still stands. Now, the group really didn't go far. All sources seem to agree almost exactly on the site of the ambush. It's about a half a mile from the Willow Grove Tavern west. A level stretch of delightfully shaded road, half a mile west of the Willow Grove, on either side heavily timbered with great oak and chestnut trees growing up close to the roadbed. And one of the early accounts, remember, says it's from the bushes of Coon's sawmill. And we're actually just west of Coon's sawmill. There was a lime kiln at the site early on. I've been out there. I've tried to locate the exact site. It's one side of the hill is they're quarried away. There's supposed to be a rock that they're hiding behind, but in the 1937 account, they said the rock is not there anymore, that had been quarried. There's supposed to be a lime kiln on the Marsh Creek side of the road, so the north side of the road. The lime kiln is said to have been used by Uriah Powell as a hiding place. In another account, Schultz is in the lime kiln. But 2 of them are on that side of the road. Henry Hahn and David Powell secreted themselves on the opposite side of the highway at the foot of a steep, rugged, stony hill known as Gallagher's Knob. And we know today where Gallagher's Knob is. Okay. And again, we have this account by Jacob Shara, who's the grandson of Henry Schultz and grew up right there, about, how they became liquored up. And Hahn swore to shoot the first rebel that he saw. At announcing this, they proceeded about, they're saying 2.5 miles from the Cashtown Inn. The only mistake here, this guy thinks the Willow Hotel is the Cashtown Inn. Somewhere he draws a line in the road. I don't know if you guys can see that there. I forget where he says that. Maybe that's in another account. But I like that he draws a line across the road, kind of like, John Wayne at the Alamo. He draws a line. So, let's see, yeah. So in its past, it gives some great details. So now let me tell you something about Henry Hahn and the Bushwhackers. So here's a notice in 1860. Henry Hahn, it's his second wife, was married to Anna Mary Catherine Powell. So all these people we're talking about in this story are closely associated. David and Uriah Powell are brothers, the son of John and Catherine Powell, who lived nearby. And their sister, Mary Ann Powell, was married to Henry Hahn. And another of their sisters, Matilda Delilah Powell, was living with Henry Schultz and would marry him right after the war. Henry Schultz's first wife had died. So basically, these 4 men are brothers-in-laws. And it gets much more complicated than that, but you don't need to know any of that yet. Or maybe not at all. Now, Henry had a son from a previous marriage named William Henry Schultz. And sometimes in the accounts of the Bushwhacker, people suggest maybe it's a son that was involved because he's 19 years old and he's closer to the age of the Powells and the Hahn that's involved. But I think it's the older man, Henry Sr. Of course, and William Henry Schultz is only 19, so he can't possibly be drinking because he's not 21 yet, right? And we know that they're not big drinkers, these people. It's interesting that in 1865, Uriah Powell and his younger brother Jacob and William Henry Schultz all joined Company K, 87th Pennsylvania together. And so they were all in service together. Now also I wanted to mention here on the bottom right that Henry Hahn's brother, William Hahn, was drafted into the 165th Pennsylvania drafted militia. He took ill on July 1st, 1863 at White House Landing and ended up being sent to Chesapeake Hospital near Fortress Monroe. And he died in service on July 6th or 7th, 1863, like a week after this event or 2 weeks after this event. So his brother is in the Army. But don't worry, because then his ex-wife will marry one of these other guys. I forget which one. Donna, I'm having trouble remembering who marries who. What really messes with us, well, I'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, let's not talk about that yet. Okay. Regardless, all 4 men resided not far from the scene of the ambush. So here's Gallagher's Knob on the 1858 map. And it probably took place here. And, we have all these people. And there's the Deerdorfs. I forget which, Aaron Shealy married a Deerdorf girl. So he, again, he has intimate knowledge of all this. And, the Mickleys are involved here, and there's the Coons, and the Schultzes are here, and there is Henry Hahn on the 1858 map. And if you look at the 1872 map, Henry Hahn has moved from this, he used to live somewhere in here, and then he moved up onto New Road, Henry Hahn. And then there's the Jeffcoats and some Schultzes. The Jeffcoats, Randy Miller, that, you know, was a researcher here. He's related to those guys. But here's Henry Schultz Jr. and Henry Schultz. So again, there's the father and son there. So all these people are local. And one of the Hahns had married an Emery. Is that your relative that had married to Emery? One of the Hahns married an Emery. The Powell. Okay. Again, I'm getting mixed up with all the Powells. Now, Henry Hahn died in 1879. And according to Aaron Shealy, John Smith, remember he called him John Smith, was a hunter and a wood chopper who lived in a log cabin at the base of the mountain. His home was unpretentious, with a gaunt, vicious-looking dog chained to a kennel. His wife is described as a woman about 30, of medium height and rather slender. Aaron Shealy wrote this at the end of his description of the bushwhacking. And again, it's about John Smith. After the disappearance of Lee's army from northern soil and the danger of capture over, he emerged from his place of concealment and again mingled among his fellows. It was then that he, seemingly unable longer to retain within his bosom a secret that was torment and a consuming fire to him, confided in several of his associates some of the details of the affair. Within a brief time, the gossips and busybodies in the neighborhood knew all about it and lost no time in repeating the story with the usual variations and embellishments to all their friends who cared to hear it. Hahn began to show signs of irritability and fretfulness on hearing of the criticisms concerning the act, which gave him considerable local notoriety. Later, he became nervous and fearful, imagining he was pursued by those who desired to do him harm. And according to like 3 more paragraphs of flowery language, he rued his act, and eventually it took a toll on his physical and mental powers, and he died. According to William Storrick, his remains were laid to rest at Flores Cemetery. And some of the other people in our story are buried at Flores Cemetery between, Cashtown and McKnightstown. And he has no stone there. We have never found any evidence of where his burial site may be in that cemetery, but apparently he is buried there, and it's a beautiful cemetery if you visit that site. We don't have many photographs of the people involved in this story, but Henry Hahn did have 2 daughters that lived to adulthood. And one of them was Margaret Hahn Plank. And so there are people who are today related to Henry Hahn. Another daughter named Apollonia, is that how you pronounce it? Apollonia. She married Jacob Schultz, the son of Henry Schultz. So there's again, these large families marry into other large families in the area. And from a lady named Deerdorf that lived in Cashtown, Randy Miller was able to acquire this photograph of Henry Schultz. We don't have a picture of the bushwhacker, but here's a picture of the bushwhacker buddy. And this Henry Schultz had 7 or 8 children, and 2 of his children had 12 children each. So there are a ton of Schultzes running around Adams County, perhaps waiting to bushwhack someone else one day. Yeah, I'm sure they'll love that. So I knew lots of Schultzes. So look into the eyes of one of the bushwhacker buddies. Okay, so I want to thank everybody for listening. I hope you learned way too much that you didn't want to know about the Bushwhacker.